Of all the people I trusted in this world, it never crossed my mind that my own son would be the one to betray me. When you raise a child, you give them everything: your time, your patience, your love, your energy, your money when you can. You make sacrifices, often in silence, because that's what being a parent means. You do it not for any reward but because you want your child to have a better life than you did. And I thought I had done just that. I thought I had taught him right from wrong, to be honest, to have integrity. But nothing prepares you for the moment when you realize the person you raised, this child who once held your hand crossing the street, has taken from you in the most hurtful way imaginable. Didn't happen all at once. That's what makes it so cruel. This wasn't some big dramatic moment of betrayal. It was quiet, subtle, crept in under the radar. When I looked back later, I realized there were moments, little warning signs, I ignored. A few odd questions here and there about my finances. A strange interest in how my pension worked. But I chalked it up to curiosity, maybe even concern. I mean, what parent wouldn't feel a bit of pride thinking their grown child wants to make sure they're taken care of in retirement? And so, I trusted him. I gave him access. Not full control, but enough to help out with some things. Online forms were hard for me sometimes, especially after I started having trouble with my eyes. He offered to manage some of my accounts, help with bill payments just to make things easier. And I let him. That was my mistake. I let my guard down not because I was careless, but because I was a parent who wanted to believe the best about their child. When you love someone that deeply, it's easy to see only what you want to see. You excuse things. You dismiss your own gut feeling because you don't want to believe something so painful could be true. I remember once seeing a bank notification I didn't recognize and thinking, oh, maybe I just forgot I spent that. But it wasn't me. And the truth is, it hadn't been me for a long time. There's a kind of heartbreak that's different when it comes from family. It's not just about the money. That matters, of course. It was my future, my safety, my independence. But what hurt more was the sense of being used by someone I loved unconditionally. It made me question everything. Did he ever really care about me? Did he see me as nothing more than a bank account to drain when it was convenient? How long had he been planning this? Or worse, was it just so easy for him that he didn't even think twice? I raised him better than that. At least I thought I did. And maybe that's what stings the most, the doubt. The feeling that maybe I failed somewhere along the line. Maybe I was too soft. Maybe I should have been more watchful, more strict. But I don't think it's weakness to love your children deeply. I think the real tragedy is when that love is taken for granted, twisted into something that can be exploited. Some nights I couldn't sleep. I'd lie there wondering what I had done to deserve this. Wondering if I could have prevented it, if I should have asked more questions, kept more control, paid closer attention. But you can't go back. You can only face the reality of what's happened. And that's what I eventually had to do. The hardest part was admitting it out loud. Telling someone else. Saying the words, "My son stole from me." That sentence alone felt like a failure. Like I had broken some sacred rule of parenthood. Parents are supposed to protect their children. But who protects the parent when the child becomes the threat? I want to say I felt anger right away, but the truth is, it was grief. Real profound grief. Because I didn't just lose money, I lost trust. I lost the image I had in my head of who my son was. And that's not something you get back easily. It took time before I stopped making excuses for him in my own mind. It took time before I let myself believe that what he did wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. It was calculated. And it was wrong. I had to sit with that truth, and it hurt. But facing that pain was the first step toward reclaiming my voice, my power, and my dignity. He didn't just steal from a bank account. He stole from my sense of safety, my ability to trust, and my belief in the bond we once had. And for that I had to act. It started with little things. A few missing dollars here and there. A transaction I didn't remember making. First I brushed it off. I thought, maybe I forgot. Maybe I bought something and just didn't note it down. That's what getting older does sometimes. You start second-guessing your own memory. And it's easier to blame yourself than to imagine something darker going on. Especially when the alternative is too painful to face. I didn't want to believe it. Not for a second. But over time the numbers stopped adding up. I'd get a statement in the mail, or sometimes not get one at all, and something in my stomach would twist. My pension, the money I had worked for over decades, was supposed to last me. I wasn't living extravagantly. I wasn't traveling the world or buying luxury items. I was living simply, carefully. I had done the right things, played it safe. And yet, slowly, my accounts were bleeding dry. There was a day I remember clearly. I went to pay for groceries, just a small trip to the market, and my card was declined. I laughed at first, embarrassed. I thought maybe it was a mistake or some technical issue. But it wasn't. I checked my balance and saw it low. Lower than it had any business being. And that moment hit me like a brick wall. Something was terribly wrong. I went home, pulled out every financial document I could find, and started digging. Line by line. Date by date. It felt like I was going through someone else's life. Someone who had been spending my money without a care in the world. Strange purchases. Online transfers. Accounts I didn't recognize. And still, part of me kept thinking, could I really have done this? Could I have let it slip this far? That's how deep denial goes. That's how strong hope can be, even in the face of obvious evidence. Eventually, the pattern became too clear to ignore. It wasn't random. It wasn't forgetfulness. Someone had been accessing my pension account. Someone had been taking from it for months. Maybe longer. And I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly who it was. I remember sitting in my living room, holding a printed bank statement, staring at one specific transaction. It was a large withdrawal made online, the kind I never would have done myself. It was like seeing handwriting you recognize. It had his signature all over it. The method, the timing, even the small details. My heart sank. My hands trembled. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't pretend anymore. When I finally confronted him, he didn't even deny it right away. There was silence. That kind of silence that tells you everything before a word is spoken. He looked down, not meeting my eyes. I kept asking, why? Why would you do this? He gave excuses. He was struggling, he didn't want to worry me, he thought he'd pay it back. But those weren't explanations. They were justifications for a betrayal he knew was wrong. And here's the thing. If he had just come to me, told me he needed help, I would have done everything I could. I've given to him my whole life. Why would I stop now? But he didn't ask. He took. He chose to steal from me, to violate that trust, and to do it quietly behind my back, knowing I was none the wiser. That's what hurt the most. Not just the theft, but the choice to deceive. In the days that followed, I kept going over every detail. Every time he said he was helping me with a bill. Every time I handed him a document. I remembered moments that seemed ordinary, now dripping with double meaning. I felt like I'd been living in a play, everyone acting, and I was the only one who didn't know the script. I started to wonder how long he had been planning it. Was it a moment of desperation, or had he seen an opportunity and taken it because he knew I trusted him too much to ever look closely? That question still keeps me up some nights. Because it's one thing to be tricked by a stranger. It's another thing entirely when it comes from someone you held as a baby, someone whose school plays you sat through, whose birthday candles you lit, whose scraped knees you bandaged. I went from disbelief to heartbreak to anger and then back again, like a carousel I couldn't get off. And through it all, I was left picking up the pieces. Figuring out how much was gone, how much damage had been done, and whether I could ever really feel safe again. The numbers in my account were smaller, yes, but the wound in my heart was what felt most empty. The discovery wasn't just about money. It was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with theft. I was dealing with betrayal that had been hiding in plain sight, wearing a familiar face, smiling the whole time. My pension wasn't just money sitting in an account. It was decades of work, sacrifice, and planning. Every early morning I got out of bed when my body ached. Every time I stayed at a job I didn't love because it offered security. Every time I chose the practical option instead of the indulgent one. It all added up to that pension. That was supposed to be my peace of mind. It was the reward at the end of a long, hard journey. Something I earned. And just like that, it was gone. When I realized the extent of what had been taken, I didn't know how to react. There was no blueprint for what to do when your entire safety net disappears at the hands of your own child. I felt like I was in a fog, moving through each day in slow motion. I would sit at the kitchen table with the bills spread out, trying to figure out what I could still afford, and how long what little I had left would last. That kitchen used to be a place where I'd sit with a cup of tea and feel proud of how far I'd come. Now it felt like a battlefield. The fear set in quickly. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet, constant dread that follows you around, even into your sleep. I started rationing how I used electricity. I counted every item I put in the grocery cart. I cut back on everything I could. There were things I never imagined having to give up, like the little contributions I made to my church or helping a neighbor out with a meal now and then. Even the idea of a bus trip to visit an old friend felt impossible. I had gone from looking forward to retirement to wondering if I'd have to go back to work. And let me tell you, looking for a job when you're well past retirement age is not only hard, it's humiliating. No one wants to say it out loud, but people look at you differently. You feel invisible in some rooms and pitted in others. And you start to believe the cruel lie that you're just a burden now. The emotional toll wasn't just financial. I stopped sleeping well. My appetite faded. My health, which had always been relatively steady, started to decline. Stress does that, it creeps into your bones, into your breathing. There were days when I didn't recognize myself. I'd look in the mirror and see someone older than I remembered. Someone worn down not just by time but by heartbreak. People talk about financial loss like it's just numbers. It's not. It's the erosion of your dignity, your independence. I had always prided myself on not needing to ask for help. I lived within my means. I was careful. And suddenly, I found myself having to call companies and explain why a payment was late, or why I needed to restructure a plan. Each call was another reminder of what had been done to me, and by whom. What hurt even more was the silence that followed from my son. No apology. No effort to fix what he broke. Just distance. Like he thought that if he stayed quiet long enough, I'd move on. Like I'd forget. But how do you forget being robbed of your peace of mind by someone you gave your whole heart to? I started to withdraw socially. I didn't want to go to gatherings or answer too many questions. I didn't know how to explain what had happened without breaking down. There's a deep shame that comes with being taken advantage of, especially by family. People don't always understand. They assume you must have done something wrong. They wonder how you didn't see it coming. And the truth is, I asked myself those same questions every single day. But even in that dark place, something shifted. A quiet resolve began to build in me. I had spent too much of my life fighting to get to where I was, working long hours, saving carefully, raising my children on values I believed in. I couldn't let it all end in silence and defeat. Yes, I was shaken. Yes, I had lost something I couldn't get back. But I still had my voice. I still had my story. And I wasn't going to let it end with me being a victim in my own life. The devastation was real. The impact was deep. But I had to decide if I was going to stay there, or if I was going to do something about it. It wasn't an easy decision. In fact, it was one of the hardest choices I've ever had to make. Turning to the law, bringing my own son before a judge, was never something I imagined would be a chapter in my life. Parents aren't supposed to do that. We're supposed to protect our children, stand by them, help them find their way when they're lost. But what happens when it's your child who causes the harm? What happens when your love for them becomes the very thing they take advantage of? For weeks, maybe even months, I wrestled with it. I told myself it was just money. That maybe he was going through something he didn't know how to talk about. That if I gave it time, he would come to me and make it right. Waited. Hope. And every day that passed without a word from him was like another door closing. I wasn't just losing money. I was losing my faith in the relationship we had or thought we had. People say that blood is thicker than water. But what they don't say is that trust, once broken, doesn't care about blood. You can love someone with every fiber of your being, and still recognize when they've done something wrong. At some point I had to face the truth. If I let it go, if I just sat quietly and absorbed the damage, I was not only betraying myself, I was teaching him that he could get away with it. That there were no consequences. And that kind of silence is dangerous. Not just for me but for him too. I remember the moment I finally said it out loud. I have to take legal action. I was sitting in my living room, staring at my bank statements again, the weight of what was gone pressing down on my chest. And those words didn't come easy. They felt cold. They felt harsh. But they were true. I had tried everything else. Conversations, letters, even reaching out through a third party. Nothing worked. He wasn't listening. And if I didn't stand up for myself, who would? When I first walked into the lawyer's office, I felt like a fraud. Like I was betraying my own child. I kept imagining how people would look at me if they found out. Would they think I was heartless? Would they say, "She's dragging her own son into court"? But the lawyer didn't judge me. He listened. He asked questions. And more importantly, he validated what I had been feeling. That I had been robbed, and that I had every right to seek justice. Preparing for the case was emotionally exhausting. I had to dig through documents, recount painful memories, and face the reality of just how long it had been going on. Felt exposed, vulnerable, like I was airing family pain in public. But beneath all of that discomfort, something else was beginning to grow, a sense of strength I hadn't felt in a long time. I had spent so long trying to protect my son from the consequences of his choices that I had completely neglected to protect myself. I wasn't doing this to punish him. I was doing it because what he did was wrong. And wrong has to be answered for, no matter who commits it. If it had been a stranger who drained my account, there would have been no hesitation. So why should it be different just because he shared my last name? The day we stood in court, I'll never forget it. I saw him across the room, older than the little boy I remembered but suddenly smaller somehow, like the weight of his choices was finally sitting on his shoulders. He wouldn't look at me at first. And I wasn't there to shame him. I was there because I needed closure. I needed him to face what he had done, not just legally but emotionally. The judge listened carefully. I told my story. I spoke calmly, clearly. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just laid it all out piece by piece like laying bricks on a road I never thought I'd walk. And for the first time, I saw something shift in my son's face. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the first flicker of understanding that this wasn't just about money. This was about trust, dignity, and the pain of being betrayed by someone you'd give your life for. I don't know what will happen to our relationship in the long run. Some wounds take years to heal, some never do. But what I do know is that I stood up for myself. I chose to stop suffering in silence. And in that courtroom, I finally made him answer for it. After the court ruling, you'd think I would have felt relief. Maybe some peace. But instead, I walked out of that courtroom with a weight in my chest that I didn't know how to carry. Yes, I had stood up for myself. Yes, I had spoken my truth. But there was no real victory in that moment. How could there be? I wasn't walking away with what I had lost. The money was gone. The trust was shattered. And the son I had once believed in stood on the other side of it all, a stranger I barely recognized. I spent a long time trying to process what had happened, not just the legal outcome but everything around it. The silence between us. The broken conversations. The questions I'd probably never get answers to. I tried to understand why he did it. What drove him to take something so vital from someone who only ever wanted the best for him? And the truth is, I still don't fully know. Maybe he felt entitled. Maybe he was desperate. Maybe he thought I'd never notice. Or maybe he just assumed I'd forgive him quietly, because that's what I'd always done before. But this wasn't like all the little things I'd let slide over the years. This wasn't skipping a chore or borrowing money and forgetting to return it. This was my future. My independence. This was my ability to live without fear. And that had been taken from me with no warning, no apology, and no plan to make it right. After everything came out, the fallout within the family was almost worse than the betrayal itself. People picked sides. Some relatives avoided me, like I had caused the drama just by standing up for myself. Others whispered behind my back, speculating on what really happened, asking questions they didn't have the courage to ask me directly. I could feel the judgment in their glances, the quiet discomfort that comes when someone challenges the image of a perfect family. But perfection was never the goal. Truth was, I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped defending my choices. If someone couldn't understand why I did what I did, if they couldn't see the pain behind the decision, then they were never really listening in the first place. And I wasn't going to beg anyone to see what was plain to me. That being a parent doesn't mean sacrificing your self-respect. I also realized something I hadn't expected. In the midst of all the heartbreak, there was still love. Not the kind that excuses everything. Not the blind, unconditional kind that lets someone walk all over you. But a quieter, sadder kind. A love that still existed beneath the damage, even though it couldn't save us from the consequences. I didn't stop loving my son. But I stopped covering for him. I stopped making excuses on his behalf. And that was an act of love for myself. There's a difference between forgiveness and forgetting. I'm still working on the forgiveness part. Some days I think I've found it, and then it slips through my fingers again. Forgiveness isn't a straight path. It's a winding road with setbacks and doubts and moments where the anger bubbles back up when you least expect it. But I am trying. Not for his sake but for mine. Because holding on to the bitterness only prolongs the pain. And I've carried enough already. I had to let go of the fantasy that he would wake up one day and be the son I remembered. I had to stop hoping for a perfect apology or a dramatic change of heart. Sometimes people don't become who you need them to be. Sometimes they show you exactly who they are, and you have to decide whether that person belongs in your life anymore. And it's hard. It's lonely. Some days I miss the good times, the sound of his laughter in the house, the long talks we used to have. I grieve the loss of that relationship just as deeply as I grieved the money. Maybe even more. But I also remind myself that I didn't create this distance. He did. I just stopped pretending it wasn't there. I know now that healing doesn't mean everything goes back to how it was. Healing means building something new out of what's left. It means finding strength in the wreckage, even when it still hurts. I don't know what the future holds between me and my son. Maybe time will open a door we can't yet see. Maybe it won't. But I do know this: I took a stand for myself, and that matters. That has to matter. Because after everything he took from me, I needed to prove, if only to myself, that I was still standing. People often think the hardest part of going through something like this is the moment of betrayal, or the confrontation, or even the courtroom. But what they don't tell you, what nobody prepares you for, is what comes after. The quiet. The emptiness. The way your world tilts, and nothing feels quite the same again. There are no instructions for how to rebuild your sense of safety, your sense of family, your place in the world, once something so personal has been broken. I woke up one morning a few weeks after everything was settled, and realized I had no idea what to do with myself. My routine felt hollow. The days stretched out long and uncertain. I had spent so much time fighting, trying to understand, trying to hold on, trying to protect what was mine, that when the fight was over I didn't know who I was without it. And that was a different kind of loss. But the truth is, something in me had already started to change, even before I recognized it. Slowly, quietly, I was becoming someone I had almost forgotten I could be. Someone who didn't live in fear. Someone who didn't keep her mouth shut just to keep the peace. Someone who stood up for herself, not because she wanted to be difficult, but because she finally understood that her life was worth defending. I started taking small steps to reclaim that life. I met with a financial advisor, someone honest and kind, who helped me create a new plan with what I had left. I restructured my budget, not out of defeat but out of control. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't reacting to someone else's decisions. I was making my own again. And let me tell you, that might sound like a small thing, but it was one of the most empowering feelings I've had in years. I began saying yes to things I used to put off. A neighbor invited me to a weekly card game. I went. I signed up for a local art class. I made myself get out of the house and talk to people, even when I didn't feel like it. And each time I did, I was reminded that life doesn't stop just because someone tried to knock you down. You get up, even if it's slow. Even if it hurts. You get up anyway. There were still moments, quiet, stubborn moments when the sadness would creep in. Especially during holidays or on his birthday. I'd see old photos or hear a certain song and feel that ache come rushing back. But I stopped letting it control me. I allowed myself to feel it, then I kept moving forward. Because pain doesn't disappear, but it can stop running the show if you let it. One thing I've learned is that strength isn't always loud. It isn't always about raising your voice or winning arguments. Sometimes strength is the quiet decision to keep living your life with purpose. To stop apologizing for setting boundaries. To forgive yourself for the things you didn't see coming. That took me time. But I got there. I started sharing my story. First with close friends, then in support groups, and eventually more publicly. First I was scared. I thought people would judge me or think I had failed as a parent. But the more I spoke, the more I realized how many others were silently carrying similar wounds. People who'd been taken advantage of by someone they loved. People who felt ashamed to talk about it because we've all been taught that family comes first, no matter what. But I've learned that love without accountability isn't love at all. It's just fear dressed up in loyalty. The more I opened up, the more connected I felt. Not just to others but to myself. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't shrinking. I had faced something that once terrified me, and I came out stronger. Not untouched, not unchanged, but stronger. I don't know if my relationship with my son will ever be repaired. That's something only time and his actions can determine. But I'm no longer waiting around for someone else's apology to move forward with my life. I've made peace with the fact that healing doesn't require everything to be fixed. Sometimes healing is just learning how to carry the weight and still walk upright. Every day that I choose to keep living with openness, with clarity, with self-respect, that is my justice. That is my recovery. Not because it erases the pain, but because it proves I am more than what was done to me.